Community Conversations. Thank you, Alexa. This is Turning the Page Anti-Racism Book Club. We've been meeting now for, this is our 4th year, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
So welcome. We've seen some of you before, and maybe a few new faces. So we will discuss over this spring semester. So today, and then we'll have 3 more sessions over the book Dying of Whiteness by Jonathan Metzl. And I'm Christina Bridges. I'm a researcher in family medicine and community health. And my co-host, Dr. Jason Glenn, who will be leading us today. And I will just, let's go to the next slide. We always like to share the purpose of this club and why we come together. And it is to understand history, patterns, and systems, a place for us to practice talking about racism and racial disparities that impact health, and personal learning and growth to create a shift within ourselves as individuals, but also as part of systems. These conversations are meant to provoke an emotional state, or they will provoke an emotional state. The content that we read and discuss, and this may be discomfort, empathy, outrage, whatever it is, it all helps to raise our consciousness. And our ultimate goal is for all of us to commit to action and systems change. So thank you for being here. And Dr. Glenn, I'll let you take over.
All right. So it's actually, wonderful to be able to present on this work and read through this work with you all. Jonathan Metzl is one of those underachievers, got an MD and a PhD, is also a Kansas City native. His parents still live here in Kansas City. His training is as a sociologist and a psychiatrist. He is also one of the national leaders in the development of the structural competency movement. So we do a lot of his, we work with a lot of his theory. Him and Helena Hansen wrote an article on structural competency, and then a book too, that has a number of clinical cases in it. He's currently the director of the Center for Medicine, Health, and Society in Vanderbilt University. And he conducted the study for his book here in Kansas, also in Missouri, and in Tennessee. We put this book on the list of choices to possibly read with this group because of the good linkages it's had with some of the books that we've already covered. And I'm specifically thinking of Heather McGee's The Sum of Us right now. So we want you all, for some of you all who are just joining us for the first time, that's fine. Some of you all who are frequent flyers, been with us, we want to be making those links, those intellectual links back and forth as we go through these different texts. So our goal is to just do an introduction of the text today. We realize everybody's busy, can't read through a whole book extracurricularly in 1 month. So we'll, over the next 3 sessions, we'll digest the book in more and more detail. Today is to give us an introduction, and then we're going to end with first a large group and then small group exercise that really is designed to take us through sort of thinking about how do we get right to be our own agents of change in what's being talked about here. So the major thesis of the work, right, is that the conservative culture war politics and policies that most appeal to working class white Americans, but not certainly only to working class white Americans, actually end up making, and this is particularly true for those same working class white Americans, makes their lives harder, makes them sicker, and shortens their lives as well, right? And he wrote this, or he was doing the research for it around the time of the 2020 election, and while Trump was still in office, right? Or actually before the 2020 election, while Trump was still in office. And so this was particularly salient as he was going around in areas of the country that were really, really strong conservative strongholds, really, really anti social solidarity programs that would help out people who are working class, and really trying to understand the conundrum of why people were so ardently against supporting policies that would make their lives so much better. He spent 7 years collecting stories and health data in Kansas, Missouri, and Tennessee, states that endorse a lot of the anti-solidarity and racist dog whistle policies aimed at punishing the minorities, the quote, minorities gaming the system, or the undeserving poor, such as, right, things like blocking healthcare reform, blocking Medicaid expansion, tax cuts for the middle class and the wealthy that end up drawing away money from the above social solidarity programs, right? And also divestment from infrastructure as well to help pay for those tax cuts for the middle class and primarily the wealthy. And then he argues, right, that psychologically and emotional, these policies feel like a win for folks who vote for policymakers who endorse them, right? But those policies end up being as dangerous for working class white people as living with asbestos in your house, right? Or growing up with secondhand smoke exposure, or not wearing seatbelts. The iatrogenic effects on your life and life expectancy are comparable. I wanted to give us a little more sort of context when we use this term, the undeserving poor. And when I'm teaching students, I love, particularly on the history of health inequities, I love starting with this essay from James Morone called Enemies of the People, the Moral Dimension of Public Health. And he really captures, right, this dynamic that animates so much of American policymaking, right? And that is the politics around the undeserving poor. And as he writes, every nation, every community thrashes out criteria by which to determine members, allocate rights, assert privileges, and identify strangers. We, them, and the boundaries in between are all cultural constructions. It is precisely at this point that liberalism, community, and moralism achieve their American symbiosis. Moral images set the boundaries around the liberal process, around the great imaginary community of the American us. On the other side of the moral divide lurk the American others. Today, they are constructed as undeserving, even predatory, lazy people, grasping for overly generous health and welfare benefits. They are undisciplined. They abuse the rights of a liberal society. The political imperative follows directly. These others must be converted or controlled. Efforts to do so infuse American politics with images of vice and virtue. The politics of drugs, drink, immigration, sexual preference, unwed mothers, and welfare reform are all redolent with moral condemnation. And so when Metzel is addressing, right, and talking about these politics of the undeserving poor, this is really, really, I think, a great language to help us capture exactly what's at play here. And so partly in introducing the content, he does some of this kind of work, right? Looking at the health profile and health needs of what's going on locally in the various states. So here we're taking Kansas, as an example. First and starting out in the top left, we're looking at obesity in Kansas and the sort of the rising amount and percent of Kansas residents that are obese over the past 30-year period. In the top right-hand corner, right, we see the percentage of ED visits that are from opioid overdoses. In the bottom left, we have maternal morbidity rate by income, and then the annual aggregate costs of select chronic health conditions, right, in the United States, what they cost us as a nation, right? All of these together, right, indicate the extent to which we really need a lot of the social solidarity programs that are aimed at improving our health, not just as individuals, but as communities as a whole, right? And it highlights all the different ways that we stand to gain, right, from doing such, right? What he talks about, right, is the strength of the commitment when it comes to, right, the formation of the ideology of whiteness, right? He said that many people interviewed expressed the knowledge that they knew some of the programs, such as the Affordable Care Act, that conservatives were fighting or targeting to destroy, could greatly help and benefit them. However, they expressed a willingness to sacrifice their own well-being for the great cause of having conservative majorities in office, controlling the courts, and winning the culture wars. And then all of these political commitments were motivated by the construction of racialized white identity, and that strives to make whiteness synonymous with gun ownership, conservatism, individualism, free market economies, etc. And I want to express this over and over again. I think Dr. Bridges and I always want to reiterate every time, right, that whiteness, blackness, race isn't about the percent of melanin that you have. It's the social construction into these identities, right? And the social construction into these identities are extremely powerful, right? And they are so powerful that people will willingly sacrifice what's good for them in all kinds of individual ways, right? In order, right, to, I mean, in essence, it's a sacrifice for the ideology, the strength of living to embody the ideology. And that's what we're dealing with here. So, for instance, we're going to take the Affordable Care Act here, but we want to talk about a number of other policies whose debates are all sort of centered around this idea of punishing the undeserving poor, right? But he takes the Affordable Care Act as the issue that was most foremost, right, at play during the time when he was doing these interviews, as there were massive conservative efforts to try to either get the law overturned in the courts, get Congress to overturn the law, right, or to have the courts sort of gut a lot of the major privileges of the law. And we were talking about things like free preventive care when the Affordable Care Act was first being touted, right? Sort of all new plans must cover certain preventive services, such as mammograms and colonoscopies, without charging a deductible, copay, or co-insurance, right? The billions in funding that would go toward prevention and public health, right? Investing in proven prevention and public health programs that would keep more Americans healthy, things like smoking cessation programs and other things like combating obesity, right? A host of new consumer protections. Insurance companies prohibited from imposing lifetime dollar limits on the benefits that they pay out, right? Billions to provide needed financial help for employment-based plans to continue to provide valuable coverage for people who retire between the ages of 55 and 65, right? As well as their spouses and dependents. And states, right, able to receive federal matching funds for covering low-income individuals and families. All of these, which should have essentially made the Affordable Care Act really appealing to a broad swath of working class families. And this is not to sugarcoat all the problems with the Affordable Care Act in terms of how it was in so many ways designed to really protect the profits of the healthcare industry, right? But, you know, even with those issues that are very much needed to be highlighted, right? All of its shortcomings, there was still so much in the bill that would have benefited the types of people that Metzl was interviewing. And he found some interesting results, particularly when he interviewed Black Americans versus interviewing white Americans in these communities, right? So when he asked rural, low-income Black community members who benefits from healthcare reform, these are the type of responses that he received, right? The first guy, he said, I think society does. I think society does, and that it keeps it, with people having insurance, it keeps the cost down for everyone. Another gentleman said, yeah, because people are healthy because of the checkups and things like that. So I think everyone. I think as a society, I think we all do by having people insured. A third gentleman said, someone has to protect the citizenship, not just Black people, but protect us as a country, you know. So when he asked the same question about healthcare reform and the Affordable Care Act to white men living in some of these same communities, right? These are the types of responses that he got. One gentleman said, I'm 53 and I already had 2 heart attacks. I have a chronic cough. I'm fat. I smoke. My diet sucks. I work 12 hours a day flipping burgers. Then I come back to my room, eat junk food, and watch TV and fall asleep. I'm a ticking time bomb, health-wise. I've got high blood pressure and bad, just like my dad did when he died young. I ain't supporting Obamacare. No way, no how. And I ain't signing up for it either. Ain't no way I want my tax dollars helping support Mexicans or welfare queens. Another gentleman said, a lot of people use this Obamacare that use the state up when there's a lot who's been sick, but there's a lot that's not sick. They go to 2 or 3 doctors and they just use the shit out of it. And then when somebody really needs it, they ain't there for you to get it. A third gentleman said, there's a lot of people that use welfare and stuff that needs to get jobs, quit having children, and really get buckled down now. I mean, I'm not saying everybody. I'm just saying there's people that have 10 and 12 kids. There ought to be a cutoff point somewhere there. And so you can see directly in these quotes that he provides, right, those politics of the undeserving poor at play. And this visceral, like fear, right, that someone who's undeserving might actually benefit from these programs if we implement them. And the last thing we can allow to happen is someone undeserving to benefit from these programs, even if someone deserving, supposedly like themselves, did get to benefit from it. Another area where he talked about was how these politics sort of infect the debate around guns in the United States, right? As he explained, like state laws to relax gun restrictions are sold to voters as about being about personal safety, Second Amendment rights, the right to concealed carry, etc. One of the things he argues is that the white passions for gun ownership are animated by a racist fear/fantasy of being attacked by a criminal, especially a criminal person of color, right? In actuality, relaxed gun laws have all these trickle-down impacts on community health that increase the number of suicides, primarily, accidental shootings, police shootings, and most profoundly, right, the largest increase is in the number of white men who get shot in suicide attempts, right? That we imagine our guns are going to be there to protect our families. But what happens, right, is that when there is a mental crisis, an emotional crisis, a psychological crisis, because the guns are so prevalent, that's the first thing people reach for to solve their problems. As he explained further, there are about 40,000 gun deaths in the US every year, and about 2/3 of them are from suicide, right? And of all the suicides by gunshot, white men account for 80%. Making guns easier to procure raises the number of white men who die from suicide, right? But this is literally one of the ways, right, that we're dying from whiteness. And because white men own so many guns and have them in their homes for protection, then it becomes the first thing they reach for in moments of extreme despair. All right, so that's kind of the introduction. What we want to do now is have us first as a group, we want to identify as many policies as we can, right, where we see this dynamic at play, where the goal is to punish the undeserving poor. And we're going to list them here, and then we're going to copy that list and put it in the chat. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, we're going to provide a couple questions for you. But I want us to think hard and see how big of a comprehensive list we can come up with right here. So turn your mics off mute. You can type it into the chat. And I am going to actually get out of the regular presentation mode so I can type